Okay, so now we've looked a little bit at DNA and we've looked a little bit about at different hominins like Neanderthals, Homo erectus, and the much earlier Australopithecines. Now we're going to look at modern humans and what we know about their origins. So sometimes you'll see like this linear progression from one species to another, like that silhouette. Um, going from some one hominin like an Australopithecine to Neanderthals and then finally to modern humans. We know that totally modern humans, that is us, were contemporaneous, meaning they lived at the same time as Neanderthals. We know from genetics that some populations of humans interbred with Neanderthals, and probably in other places, other species like Neanderthals um, interbred with human populations in Africa and in Asia and so forth. And so when we look in the fossil record, some of the earliest um, hominins that look more like us, that have the domed skull, that are less prognathic, meaning that their jaws, that their faces are not sticking out as much, these occur in Africa. And this, combined with some genetic evidence, suggests that modern humans, us, arose first in Africa. It's too bad we can't be in person to talk about this, but there is another set of DNA in your cells called mitochondrial DNA, and of course, it's in the mitochondria, right, which is an organelle in all of your cells. And unlike your nuclear DNA, the mitochondrial DNA gets passed on only through your mother. So that means whether you're male or female, it doesn't matter. You have the mitochondrial DNA of your mother, so it doesn't recombine like nuclear DNA. And geneticists have used this to look at, let's skip that one, um, where people first arose, or to look at the diversity in human populations. So if we look at mitochondrial DNA and actually nuclear DNA as well, the place that has the most variation is Africa. And almost entirely, everyone else in the world is a subset of that African variation. Okay? We looked a little bit at founder effect when we looked at, or in chapter 8, when we looked at genetics, and founder effect is like New Mexico's disease, where an early Spanish settler passed on a SNP to his descendants and so forth and so on, so that today some people have CCM or cerebral cavernous malformation because of that original founder. This is the same idea where you have all this variation in Africa, right? And only a subset of that variation gets transferred out into Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and then on into the New World, North and South America. And what's more, the fossil evidence and the genetic evidence both point to Africa being the original homeland of totally modern humans. Here you can see these are African variants, and they slowly accrue mutations and they turn, from L to L3, from L3 to N. These are just different variations based on new SNPs that are accruing all the way to U, which happens to be my particular mitochondrial DNA variant. All right, so that brings us to something that I think a lot of people have trouble with, and that is this time period called the Upper Paleolithic. And really, it's not even a time period, it's just a tool set that totally modern humans are using. And the Upper Paleolithic is just a designation given to people that were living during the Ice Ages, also known as the Pleistocene, uh, in Europe. And the reason we're talking about Europe, right, instead of Africa, the homeland of people, is that Europe has really amazing preservation because people were living in caves, and that created a kind of buffer against wind and water and other forms of erosion. When we talk about behavioral modernity, we're talking about totally modern humans, okay? And so the Upper Paleolithic is characterized by these features. Things like complex tool making, elaborate burials, tailored clothing, personal adornment like jewelry, organized settlements, and mainly, above and above all, really clearly, representational art. Neanderthals weren't stupid. They had complex tool making, so there's not really a clear line between what Neanderthals were doing and what humans were doing. And of course, we know that they interbred, so they couldn't have been that different. Um, Neanderthals also clearly had burials. They just didn't have grave goods in the same sense that totally modern looking humans did. Okay, so I know humans really like their categories. There's Neanderthals and there's humans, and they're totally separate. It's not That's not really the case. There's quite a bit of overlap. When we talk about behavioral modernity, we're talking about this suite of stuff. Remember back the first or second week when we talked about what makes a human, what's different about the human species. And all these things came up, right? Complex tool making, religious rituals, especially, care for the deceased. We saw a little bit of that in bonobos, but nothing like what humans do. Certainly, um, animals don't wear clothing, or there's a little bit of personal adornment where Julia the chimpanzee puts a piece of grass in her ear. But again, nothing like the obsession that modern humans, have with personal appearance. Okay, and of course, art. Um, we see that sometimes chimpanzees like to paint, but they don't do representational art. They don't make art that looks like stuff. Okay, so in the next lecture, we're going to talk about some of the evidence for these things amongst modern humans in Europe. All right, we'll see you then. Bye.